You won't believe what happened when some so-called HOA cops decided to walk right into my barn without any permission. Yeah, I said HOA cops, not the real police, but those overstepping neighborhood enforcers who think they can boss people around like they own the place. This wasn't just some minor misunderstanding or friendly visit. No, they crossed a serious line, and things got way more intense than I ever expected. I had no choice but to protect my property and my bulls to stop them from causing even more trouble. Imagine the shock of seeing people who aren't law enforcement just stroll into your barn like they have the right to be there. It felt invasive, disrespectful, and downright threatening. These weren't strangers. They were representing the Homeowners Association, the group supposed to keep peace and order, but instead, they acted like they were above the law. As someone who takes pride in their land and animals, especially my bulls, I knew I couldn't just stand by and let this happen. So what did I do? I locked them in with my bulls. And no, this isn't some reckless stunt. My bulls are strong, intimidating, and they guard their space fiercely. I'm not talking about harm, just a firm message. You don't come into my space uninvited. After that, I didn't stop there. I took it a step further and filed trespassing charges. It wasn't just about me. It was about standing up for what's right and showing that nobody, not even the HOA, can trample over my rights. But this isn't the end of the story. What happened next? How did the HOA react? Did the bulls really make a difference? And how? Did the whole neighborhood respond? Stick around, because you're about to hear the full story, and trust me, it gets even more unbelievable from here. Before all this chaos unfolded, things had been relatively quiet around here. I live on a pretty big piece of land, and I've always enjoyed the peace and space it offers. The bulls have been part of my life for years. Now they're like family, and I take their care seriously. They're protective by nature, but I've never had any real trouble with them. The barn is their home, and I make sure it's safe and secure. It's my sanctuary too. But lately, the HOA had been tightening their grip on everyone's property. They started sending letters about minor infractions, things like where you park your truck or the type of plants you have. I felt like they were looking for reasons to control everything. I figured it was annoying, but nothing to worry about. Then, one day, I noticed their cops showing up around my property, acting like they had the authority to enforce rules without proper notice or explanation. That's when things began to spiral. The real turning point was when they came into my barn. No warning, no permission, just walked right in. It felt like a violation, like they didn't respect the fact that this was my private property. I kept asking myself, why would they do this? Were they searching for something? Or trying to intimidate me? It didn't make sense. And it made me more suspicious of their motives. The tension between me and the HOA had been building for weeks. But locking them in with the bulls was my way of drawing a line. It was about standing up to bullying and showing that I wasn't going to be pushed around. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. The whole situation raised more questions than answers, and I knew the HOA wouldn't just back down. What would they do next? And how far were they willing to go to assert control? The story was only getting started. As the days passed after that tense encounter, the conflict with the HOA only seemed to deepen. The neighborhood was buzzing with whispers. Some neighbors sided with me. Others seemed to fear the HOA's growing power. I started hearing stories about similar incidents, where the HOA's enforcers crossed lines, acting more like bullies than community helpers. It felt like a pattern, not just a one-off mistake. At the same time, the bulls became more than just animals protecting their territory. They became symbols of resistance. Friends and neighbors began to visit, offering support, and sharing their own frustrations with the HOA's strict and sometimes unfair rules. Some talked about secret meetings where the HOA board made decisions behind closed doors. Decisions that didn't always seem to have the community's best interests in mind. The tension wasn't just about property lines or barn access anymore. It was about control, respect, and who really had power in this neighborhood. On my end, the legal side started creeping in. Filing trespassing charges against HOA members was a bold move, and it stirred up even more controversy. I had to gather evidence, document everything carefully, and prepare for what could be a long fight. The HOA pushed back with their own threats and warnings, trying to intimidate me into dropping the charges. It felt like a battle where no one wanted to back down, and every step forward came with a new obstacle. Behind the scenes, I also discovered that some HOA members weren't even aware of how far this had gone. There were whispers of division within their own ranks. Some wanted to handle things peacefully, while others seemed determined to escalate the conflict. That internal struggle added a whole new layer of uncertainty. With every day that passed, the stakes got higher. The bulls, the barn, trespassing, it was all part of a bigger story about standing up for your rights and challenging the status quo. But how far would this go? And who would come out on top? The answers were still out there, waiting to unfold as the tension between me and the HOA reached a boiling point. Things started moving fast, not in a good way. Every interaction felt like walking on thin ice, with one wrong move threatening to shatter whatever fragile piece was left. The bulls remained my silent protectors, but even they seemed to sense the growing unease around the property. I caught myself watching the driveway more than usual, waiting for the next unexpected visit or confrontation. The HOA's cops didn't back off. Instead, they ramped up their presence, showing up at odd hours, sometimes in pairs, sometimes with more people than before. It was clear they wanted to intimidate, to send a message that I was under their watch. Meanwhile, neighbors started sharing stories of their own, run-ins, stories that painted a picture of a community divided and on edge. Some worried that the situation could spiral out of control. Others quietly supported me but feared retaliation. On my side, the legal pressure was mounting too. The trespassing charges I filed stirred up more trouble than I expected. There were letters, phone calls, even hints of counteractions from the HOA's lawyers. It felt like a storm was gathering, and no one knew exactly when or where it would hit hardest. I spent long nights going over documents, making sure I was ready for whatever came next. But beneath all this, a deeper question nagged at me. Why were the HOA members so determined to cross lines that shouldn't be crossed? Was it just about rules and property, or was there something else fueling this conflict? The secret meetings, the sudden aggression, the refusal to back down, it all felt like pieces of a bigger puzzle I hadn't quite figured out yet. Every day, the situation grew more intense, the stakes higher. The barn, the bulls, the trespassing, they were no longer just incidents. They were symbols of a fight that had become personal. I knew the moment of reckoning was close, but what that would look like, I couldn't be sure. All I knew was this story was far from over, and the next chapter would be the most intense yet. Just when I thought things couldn't get any more intense, a new twist hit me out of nowhere. One morning, I found a letter slipped under my doorknob from the HOA this time, but from an attorney claiming to represent a group of neighbors. At first, I figured it might be support or maybe a warning to back off, but as I read through it, everything changed. The letter accused me of violating some obscure community rules no one had mentioned before and threatened a lawsuit if I didn't comply immediately. It wasn't just about my barn anymore. Suddenly, it felt like the whole neighborhood was turning against me. Some of those neighbors I thought were quietly on my side started pulling away, nervous about getting involved. Others, who had seemed neutral, were now openly siding with the HOA's aggressive tactics. The feeling of isolation was creeping in. and it made me question who I could really trust. Then came the most shocking part. The letter hinted that the HOA might be planning to bring in outside security, or even local law enforcement to handle the situation if I didn't back down. The line between HOA authority and actual police was blurring, and that blurred line made everything more dangerous and unpredictable. My bulls, my barn, they weren't just symbols of protection anymore. They were at the center of a battle that could escalate beyond what I ever imagined. The stakes were higher than ever, and the peaceful life I once knew felt miles away. With the HOA digging in their heels and the community divided, I realized this wasn't just about property or rules. It was about standing up to an entire system that seemed determined to silence me. I had to prepare for whatever was coming next, but the uncertainty and tension were suffocating. The question now wasn't just how I would defend my land, but how far this fight would go, and if it could even be won. The day everything came to a head was unlike any other. I knew the HOA wasn't going to give up easily, but I wasn't about to back down either. When I saw their cops pull up again, this time with a couple of legal-looking people, was ready. I stood my ground, knowing full well that this confrontation could change everything. The bulls were calm but alert, and the barn doors were locked tight. They tried to push their way in, citing some vague authority. But I reminded them firmly that no one has the right to enter private property without permission, not even the HOA. The tension was thick, every word charged with frustration and years of built-up resentment. Then, out of nowhere, one of the HOA board members stepped forward. But instead of continuing the aggression, they surprisingly admitted they'd overstepped. It was like a sudden crack in their united front. What followed was a heated but honest conversation aired in front of a few neighbors who had gathered. They confessed to miscommunication, poor management, and letting power go to their heads. I laid out my side: the trespassing, the intimidation, the invasion of privacy. And they listened, really listened. In that moment, something shifted. The HOA agreed to drop the trespassing accusations and promised to respect property boundaries. Moving forward, it felt like a victory not just for me, but for anyone feeling trapped under unfair rules. Yet, just as I thought the storm had passed, the final twist hit. One of the legal-looking people was actually an undercover investigator from a local government agency, alerted by complaints from several neighbors about HOA abuses. They revealed that the entire HOA board was under investigation for misuse of authority and other violations. The bulls, the locked barn, the trespassing charges, they had sparked something bigger than I ever imagined. The fight was far from over. But now it wasn't just about one barn or one property. It was about holding those in power accountable. And that battle was just beginning. After the undercover investigator revealed the HOA board was under scrutiny, the atmosphere shifted completely. Neighbors who had been hesitant before started coming forward with their own stories about unfair rules and heavy-handed enforcement. The community began to rally, realizing that this wasn't just about one person or one barn, but about fairness and respect for everyone's rights. The HOA board members faced real consequences, and the investigations led to changes in how the neighborhood association operated. New leadership was brought in, people who were committed to working with homeowners instead of against them. The tension that had filled the air for so long slowly began to fade, replaced by a cautious but hopeful sense of trust. As for me and my bulls, life returned to a more peaceful rhythm. The barn was once again a safe space, and the bulls stayed calm, no longer needing to stand guard against unexpected intrusions. The trespassing charges I filed were dropped after the HOA agreed to respect boundaries. And the entire ordeal became a powerful reminder of what can happen when people stand up for themselves. This experience taught me and, hopefully, others. Watching that protecting your property and your rights is not always easy, but it's necessary. Sometimes those who claim to protect us can overstep, and it takes courage to push back. But when you do, you might just spark a change bigger than you ever expected. So if you ever find yourself facing an overbearing HOA or anyone else trying to cross the line, remember this story. Stand firm, know your rights, and don't be afraid to fight for what's yours. Because sometimes it's the fight that brings a community together and creates a stronger, fairer place for everyone. Thanks for listening. If you want to hear more stories like this, be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell. I'll see you in the next one.